I used to think that doing well meant studying excessively for long hours in the library, making loads of notes, and sacrificing my mental health. And honestly, that kind of mindset just made me feel so overwhelmed and made me feel like I couldn't do it, even though I definitely could. What changed my grades wasn't just studying for a long time. It was understanding how memory actually works, which I'm going to share with you guys today. In this video, I'm going to talk you through my current study routine and how that helped me become an efficient, high-achieving student. I wish I had this routine in the beginning of my undergraduate degree because it would have saved me so many hours and so much stress. Funny enough, some of the things that helped me most are the stuff that I stopped doing rather than employed into my routine. If you're doing a content-heavy degree or course, you'll realize that the issue is not a lack of material, rather it's the lack of understanding how learning works. The problem is that there's usually a surplus of material to learn, but little time. Nobody actually teaches you how to study effectively. This took me lots of trial and error to nail this technique, and I really hope you guys take away something from this video that helps you. At the beginning of my degree, I tried to do what kind of every student does by being good and taking lots of notes during lectures, trying to look back on those notes, rewriting the notes, highlighting things, thinking that that was significant. I used to sit at my desk for absolutely ages trying to understand all of this knowledge in front of me. And honestly, it was just like I was staring at these words and absorbing absolutely nothing. Let's start with the biggest change I made in my routine. The first thing that made the biggest difference to me was adjusting the way that I studied. So instead of studying for huge chunks of time at once, I prefer to space out my study sessions over smaller increments. So that may mean instead of doing like a 6-hour study session one day, I would space that out over 2 days and do maybe 2 hours at a time. I know that sounds simple, maybe even slightly annoying advice because everyone says it, but it is so often said for an actual reason. Cramming before exams or an important deadline is often what a lot of students do. Now, this overwhelms your brain and it doesn't give it time to really retain that information long term. You're just overwhelming it, and it's not exactly the kind of mindset you want to go into an important exam with. When you come back to information repeatedly over time, you're actually training your memory to get stronger. This is called spaced repetition. Memory gets stronger when your brain has to retrieve something after a gap. That's also why cramming can cause this false sense of reality. You recognize the material because you've just seen it, but recognition is not the same as active recall. So I stopped relying on last-minute cramming sessions to revise because it was simply not doing me any justice at all. I would go into exams feeling super overwhelmed with all the content and trying to remember anything I could. So what I started doing was building out these short study sessions throughout the weeks that would allow me to focus on my areas of weakness and just give my brain that time to space out the revision sessions. So then when I came back to it, it would be more effective because I would be trying to recall that knowledge after that period of time had gone by. That sort of steady repetition made everything feel way less chaotic. When I think about it, a lot of the highest achieving students often have a system that prevents them from falling behind. So that's going back to those short study sessions that I mentioned, and I would usually do these throughout the year. The second thing I did was starting to go into lectures with at least a tiny bit of familiarity. So this doesn't mean pre-learning the whole topic, because no, that's not what you need to do. That's just excessive workload. So before I go into a lecture, I usually download the content and the lecture slides, have a quick skim through it, and highlight any terms that are unfamiliar to me. I find that this is really helpful in just familiarizing yourself with what's about to come up. So even if you just spend 15 to 20 minutes looking through those upcoming slides, it can really help you and prepare you to note down any terms that you don't recognize. If there was a term I didn't recognize or a process that really confused me, I just take a few minutes to research it beforehand so I have a better grasp and understanding, because then I knew it wouldn't delay me as much when it came to the lecture. This matters a lot because prior exposure actually improves your comprehension overall. When your brain has seen a topic before, even briefly, the lecture starts to feel less like brand new material and more like a second pass at something. That ends up making things feel a lot easier to follow along with and will ultimately help you understand the content way better. Because if you go into a teaching session or a lecture seminar with no prior exposure, a lot of that time is just wasted trying to orient yourself and understand what is going on. And once I started doing this, honestly, I feel like lectures became way more engaging and I was able to follow along way better. In the end, getting a lot more out of them than I ever had before. Section 3 is what I I do during my lectures and how this helps. First of all, stop writing a million notes. Just please stop doing that, because honestly, a lot of people think that writing notes is the correct thing to do or the best way to study. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely people out there that find that note-taking is the way that they learn. But most cases, that's just really not how the brain works. I was so used to taking notes on Notion and having my lovely little Cornell method. In lectures, it just meant that a lot of the time was wasted just making coherent notes and tidying things up and just typing and typing, and I would end up missing the next part of the slides. In a way, when you're making those notes, you're trying to get as much information that's important down, and you're just wasting that time trying to type everything correctly and sort of translate that material from what you're hearing into a document or handwritten notes. But you're not actually having that time to process what is going on and what you're trying to absorb. In most cases, active recall is the best way to learn and absorb information, and I found that I would make all of these notes and I would never look back at them again. That just simply wasn't useful, or if I did look back at them again, it was sort of just tidying them up. The thing that I found most useful was using Anki and using that time in lectures to make quick Anki cards on topics that I thought I need to know, or definitions and terms that I think I should write down. So instead of having those notes, I would already be making those flashcards as I'm learning, and I'd have more time to absorb the information while the lecturer is speaking or the teaching session is going on. After lectures, I would use this as sort of like a condensing and consolidation time. If I'd starred or flagged up any slides during the lectures, any terms that confused me, I'd go back to them, try to understand them, take the time to look through the provided resources. And if I had any incomplete flashcards, I'd just finish those up. But I'd also like to go back through my flashcards that I'd made during the lecture, tidy them up and ensure that kind of optimized in a way. So by revisiting these key ideas from the lecture, it allows your brain to sort of consolidate that information, and you have this time to wrap it up independently. There's no more information that's being thrown at you currently, so you have that time to look back, understand, take any time you need to really understand those key topics. Ideally, what I'd like to do is have a small break, so that could be like get some lunch, get a snack, just have some time to step away from the material, because that's very important. Ideally, on the same day as the teaching session or lecture, I'd like to do some active recall. I'd come back and try to do some flashcards. Those would be the flashcards that I would have made on the day during the lecture, just to get that information into my long-term memory. If you're not a fan of flashcards, something else I found very useful is looking back at the slides and the content and trying to explain those key concepts or terminology to myself. Looking at it, covering it and repeating it in a way that you understand. Information is so quickly forgotten if it's not repeatedly encountered. That's basically the whole point of the forgetting curve. If you don't return to material, it fades way faster in your memory than you would even realize, because then you're just asking your future self to learn it again all the way back from scratch. Moving on to section 5, if I had to tell students to prioritize one way of studying, apart from Anki, of course, I love Anki, it would be question banks. They are incredibly useful because question banks force you to do what exams require. Retrieve information, apply it, discriminate between different options, and think. That is active recall, and active recall is far more effective than passive review if you're looking for long-term retention. There is something so important about exposing yourself to questions regarding the content that you're learning. At first, it can feel very uncomfortable because oftentimes question banks sort of expose your knowledge gaps very quickly, but you need to remember that getting questions wrong within question banks are not failure. It's just teaching you where you need to focus your energy and study. For me, it's been the most effective way to identify what needs improvement and what my strengths are, which topics, and honestly everything. That also stops your revision style from becoming too detached from the weight of your exam. Question banks are particularly helpful if you're doing MCQ style exams. This can also be relevant if you're doing an essay-based university degree or subject. You might have long essays or lengthy questions that you need answering. This would be a great opportunity to access previous mock papers and really test yourself where you can on these types of questions, and also just marking yourself against that marking rubric to really get that feedback and see the areas in which you can improve. Doing practice questions really allows you to see how you're thinking and how that compares to what they're looking for in exams and assignments. Number 6 is you should keep a weak area list. So I started keeping a list of my topic weaknesses. Any topic that kept coming up either in my flashcards or question banks and just kept catching me out, I would make a list of, keeping it as like an honest document of things I need to work on and prioritize. Because one thing I notice is that if you don't identify your weaknesses, revision can often become very performative in a way. You'll often find yourself prioritizing things that you enjoy or you know you're good at because you get that positive reinforcement from getting all the questions right or understanding the topic very easily. And we often find ourselves putting off those difficult topics, those things that are hard to grasp and understand. And I can't stress this enough that you keep a list of the areas that you find difficult or you repeatedly struggle with or you're not doing very well with. You don't want to enter into an exam room with sort of a false sense of confidence. Having this list makes your revision targeted. Your weak area list is probably the most honest and useful revision guide that you'll ever make. I'd like to discuss breadth before depth. Something that's helped me a lot is learning to prioritize breadth over depth initially. I used to get stuck on the tiny details early into my revision, which was not useful at all. I spent so much time trying to fully understand one niche part of a topic while still not having a very strong overview of the entire topic at hand. Details stick much easier when it has something to cling to. If you understand the broader framework of a concept, a topic, a subject, the finer details become way easier to learn and understand as you're able to bring them all together. Your brain is sort of able to compartmentalize. Being overwhelmed academically stems a lot from trying to go into depth too early. You don't need to know every obscure detail. So what you should prioritize is having a very strong and wide understanding of the topic generally. So then when you go into study those minute details and those finer complex things, you'll be able to bring those ideas together and link them to something. There'll be a broader structure for you to understand. Because otherwise it just feels like you're learning isolated facts, which is not helpful at all. To build a strong knowledge base, you need to have a nice framework where everything can kind of fit in together and flow. Sometimes a topic can feel very, very difficult, not because it's super advanced, but because the underlying foundation is very shaky. Moving on, I'd like to talk about studying with friends. Obviously, if you're going to the library and you're just going to a study room and chatting for hours, that is not effective. What I mean is finding someone who's ready to lock in and go to the library with you and just really crank out this subject. The most effective thing that I have found is using each other to explain concepts, teaching that person something and they teach you something. You can often feel like you understand something just from reading it off the slides or reading some research on it, but when you go to explain it, it shows the gaps in your knowledge. It feels very different when you have to talk through the process very clearly to someone else out loud. That's when gaps become very obvious, and this can be super useful for guiding your revision. This also builds confidence because you start to feel able to better explain topics. Everything has to be accurate and you begin to phrase things in your own way. That enables your brain to store that knowledge into the long-term memory. Another thing I'd like to point out is working through questions together can be so helpful. So people often approach topics in different ways, and it can be really useful to see how your friend has approached it and what their logic was, their process of thinking, because we can often learn so much from each other. This can also reduce burnout because intense, isolated, solo study sessions often leave people feeling so tired, overwhelmed, overworked. But when you're working with someone, you have someone there with you as like a sort of moral support and study motivation, and that can be so useful. Moving on, I'd like to discuss how I scale my revision before exams. So this is the dreaded exam season. When exams got closer, I didn't necessarily entirely reinvent my whole study routine because I initially built it as something that was concrete and would serve me throughout my degree. I think a big mistake that people make is that they often panic. Don't get me wrong, I've definitely procrastinated so much on assignments and other exams previously. What helped me a lot was scaling what I was already doing. As the exam season approached, I'd start to increase the intensity of my study sessions. I would do more question bank questions. I would devote more time to studying. I would spend more time identifying my areas of weaknesses as I approached the exam. This would allow me to see what is more relevant, continually identifying the areas of strengths and the areas of weaknesses papers, and I wanted to make my study blocks more specific, sort of subcategorize the topics that I'd want to go over. Within those study blocks, I'd sort of identify the way in which I'd like to study. So was I going to do 2 hours of Anki flashcards, 2 hours of a question bank, making things more condensed and manageable, but also extending them more than I usually would. By exam season, your revision should feel way more concise, sharper, slightly longer, but not drastically so. You shouldn't be cramming because you're just overwhelming your brain. Moving on to what I stopped doing. A lot of my improvement to my study routine didn't come from adding lots more in. It actually came from taking away things. I stopped making notes just for the sake of feeling very organized. I remember in first year, I had a system where every lecture I had comprehensive notes and I just would never look back on them. Even if I did, I was just sort of staring at the words and not really understanding them. And I stopped waiting until I felt ready to do questions. And I also stopped sacrificing my sleep to stay up late before exams and cram in as much as I could. A lot of revision methods may feel comforting and productive, even though they're not, because they don't challenge you very much. You're going to learn the most when you're straining, when you're challenging yourself, when you're making mistakes. You make mistakes and you learn. You can read and highlight for hours and never recall that information because it just exits your short-term memory. Questions, recall, explaining things out loud in your own words, testing yourself, revisiting all your weak areas are so important. Those methods can feel harder, and they are harder, but that's because they are more effective and you will get way more out of your study time. Once I accepted that, studying became way less about spending as much time as I could in the library and way more about actively recalling that knowledge and understanding its foundations. Section 11 is health is a non-negotiable. It doesn't matter if it's exam season, it doesn't matter if it's the finals, your health is number one. And I honestly think it's a point that's very underestimated for a lot of people and something that's often very disregarded by loads of students. Sleep, exercise, rest, social connection are all key elements that affect your concentration. These are things that will ultimately impact your performance, your memory, your mood, your confidence, and your ability to keep going consistently over time. Sleep in particular has been scientifically proven to improve your memory. So if you're looking to approach studying in an effective manner, bring that knowledge into your long-term memory, consistent sleep is so important for that, especially for that memory consolidation. So if you're revising every day but sleeping poorly and you have an out of whack sleep schedule, you're really doing yourself no favors. You're making your brain's job way harder. And I know that so many people make it seem like at exam season, all of sort of health focus has to go out the window. Honestly, shouldn't be like that. But in my experience, neglecting yourself rarely makes you a better, high achieving student. It usually makes revision feel a lot worse, a lot more painful, and it just is not as effective. Meeting up with friends, doing some social things, don't isolate yourself. Even if that means just studying together, that's so good for your mental health. Your brain needs fuel, you need sleep, and if you want to perform at your best, you need to be at your best. Sometimes discipline is just about shutting the laptop and going to bed. You cannot expect top performance from a brain that you're running into the ground. If I had to summarize everything in this video, it would be this. I stopped asking myself, how many hours did I devote to studying? Instead, I reframed it as, did I revise in a way that will actually stick? Because once you understand that effective revision is built upon repetition, retrieval, and identifying your weak areas, you stop wasting so much time on methods that are doing you no good. I really hope that this video gave you a more realistic idea of how to study well without completely losing your mind. You do need a system that will actually work for you. And if this was helpful, please leave a comment below, and also just let me know, what do you think and what works for you? Do you have any exams coming up? As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. Please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps this channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later. High five.